Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Maya
Yeah,
Killtron in the flesh. Well, not really.
I know, but with almost 1,000 cases today, this is as good as it's going to get.
I have tea. What do you have? Where's your love touch mug? The official Maya Killtron.
You want me to get it?
Sure.
Okay, 1 second.
Boom. All right. So now we're connected.
Cheers.
All right. Now we can start this interview. So, Maya Killtron, we haven't actually had a formal kind of talk, right? We've known each other for so long.
Yeah, I mean, uh, well, I've actually known about you for a long, long time just because
Because I'm a legend.
you have been a fixture of the Toronto music scene for 20 years.
Yeah, more than that actually. But yeah, you probably uh, first heard about me through the radio show, I guess.
I can't remember. I know I had seen you perform at or DJ at a supermarket in Kensington Market in downtown Toronto, and I remember that. And I think I had gone to a couple parties there.
Okay, yeah. So I think that's around the same time we started we played a few shows together back then, I feel, where I was DJing and you were playing in a live band. And so at that time, were you in school?
I may have been. There was a period where I started kind of crossing over from being a student into trying to make a career for myself. I think at that time I was really good at being a session musician, and that's kind of what academic training sets you up for. It doesn't really set you up for artist life, but being part of a band or being a support musician or being a studio person, that's kind of where I saw myself going in a way.
And
But
you were a studio musician. What kind of stuff were you doing? What were you playing?
I was invited just to take part in recordings, and a lot of it was because I could sing and play violin. You know, maybe I wasn't the best violinist or maybe I wasn't the singer they're looking for, but in me, they had one salary instead of two, so I was often hired.
For sure. If you look at a lot of Grammy nominated engineers, producers, like they have Grammys for engineering and producing and songwriting because they're just in the studio constantly and they're just making music, right? With the artist.
Absolutely. I mean, just think of the skill sets that you also developed throughout your entire career, which now enable you to run a business and a label. Whereas when you're starting out, you don't have all those business skills. And there's something to be said for not only acquiring these musical craft and technical skills, but also being able to run manufacturing, write formal business emails, contact people about gigs, tours, and distribution. Like those are skills that people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to do MBAs and business education in. And it is acquired throughout the length of our career. And it's led to you being able to do this, which is really great.
Right? Because as an artist and producer, I've been putting out and making my own albums for a long time. And starting the label is really no different than like a project like making an album because it's all of the same steps up until the part where you need to get the physical thing in a shop. And that's just basically the part that the label does. But it's something that a lot of artists have been doing anyway. You know, that's how that all starts and in getting your band going when no one else is interested in helping you.
The acquisition of these skills and to be like someone who wears a lot of hats is not only like an asset, but I think it's essential now. Like the people that are fantastic artists who don't put energy into that side of the career either will depend on a label and end up not with a great contract, or they won't be able to make those moves into putting out their own music and getting it not only into a store, but into someone's hands who wants to support them and listen to the music and keep buying products and albums.
You talked about the saturated market, which absolutely it is. Now that kind of social media has leveled the playing field for artists around the world, both a good and a bad thing. But can we talk about vinyl for a second? Because I know that you were really interested in getting into the vinyl market, and personally, as a DJ and vinyl collector, so did I, only because I wanted to actually hold my own physical record, which there's a level of satisfaction there in having a physical product that you can't get with digital. What's the word I'm thinking of? You're setting yourself apart from all the other artists who don't have vinyl to sell.
Yeah, for me,
is that what interested you in having your vinyl?
yes and no. I think initially, when I started putting out singles, in this sort of genre, in the modern boogie world and the funk world, I was like, okay, well, this market is open, and I always loved this music, and it's weird that I never wanted, like, I was afraid to just do what I wanted to do. So part of it was, oh, well, this world exists on this medium. People want it. So for me, part of it was a business decision, like, oh, well, if you're gonna enter this world, that's part of the legitimizing yourself as entering and saying, like, yeah, no, I'm part of it too. I get it. I understand the artists. I understand the collectors and the fans. So giving them something that they want is that sort of rite of passage. And I think, we have come out of a few eras of listening mediums. Like, we have come from cassettes into CDs, into the first version of iTunes, and you've seen, like, physical copies mean something. For the first time in history, vinyl factories are opening, like people are going into the industry and building manufacturing facilities, which were closing for all of our lives until now.
Yeah, so as a DJ, I started in the early 90s, and for DJs, vinyl was always the medium of choice until, of course, CDJs came around, and a lot of people kind of migrated to that, and then digital. I always stuck with the vinyl, and it's funny because every year it seems like there would be a news article on how vinyl is making a comeback. And now here we are, like, vinyl is fully fledged, like, the best selling medium.
I think a lot of the vinyl journey, like wanting to put out an LP, was like a decision I wanted to make. It was a good business decision, and it fit the medium. I understand, like, I was supported initially by DJ culture, so you want to give that culture what they want from you, and it's not streaming, it's physical copies. And then after we started working together, first with Found You and then with Fired Up, I didn't really understand the 45 market at all. In fact, I didn't even really know how to type out 45 or 7-inch and really understand, like, my own ignorance. I had to go through that learning curve of understanding that culture and, like, getting into it. And now I see, like, oh, there's this other market. On top of the vinyl market, there's a subculture of 7-inch culture, and what that means. And there are DJs that exclusively play 45s, and I didn't really know about that world. And now you see, like, oh, this is an entirely different market to get into that's also, like, super viable and really interesting. And I don't know, it's an evolution of your career when you learn more about your fans. And I find this to be, like, fascinating and also really cool because I get the satisfaction of having this cool product that I'm really proud of, but then it's also like a whole world exists where people want this type of product, and I just didn't know about it. 2 years ago, if you asked me about the 45 world, I'd be like, I know the setting on my turntable, and that's about it.
Yeah. It's funny because to the end user, an album makes more sense because, a 45, you can fit 4 minutes max per side, whereas an LP, you can fit about, 12 to 15 minutes. So it's less getting up, flipping the record. But for a DJ, it makes a lot of sense to have a 45 because you're going to a gig, what would you rather carry? A crate of 12 inches or a little box of 45s? You know, I can fit a box of 45s in my bike basket and go to a gig and play a 4-hour set. So that's the kind of convenience that 45s will give you. But now I feel like as a consumer, 45s have become more viable just because there's a little bit of a cool factor, let's be honest.
Oh, yeah.
45s are known to appreciate faster as well because they're usually pressed up in limited runs. So it's interesting to see that consumers have now also embraced the 45 culture.
There's an entire vinyl section in, you know, Urban Outfitters. So you can't get much more mainstream than that.
Right.
And they're reissuing the Backstreet Boys on vinyl. You know, like, were they ever really even issued on vinyl? And they're reissuing them? Like, that's a cultural change and a shift for the consumer. And the average consumer who maybe isn't an extreme audiophile is now really interested in vinyl. So I think, yeah, like you're saying, the 45 is just going to be the next swing of the wheel into this culture. So we're ahead of the game.
There you go. Okay, so let's change it up and let's talk a little bit more about the artistic process. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, when did you start getting into boogie and funk and all that stuff?
As a kid, but I didn't know what it was. I just like, hi Nova.
Yeah, Nova.
Oh, she's so shiny. Yeah, when I was younger, I loved boogie and funk music, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't really identify with genres that much outside of classical and what I heard on the radio, or maybe rock and roll. But it was on in the house and I loved it. And yeah, I didn't really get to figure out what it was until much later. And then realizing like, oh, I had been listening to this music all the time, but I had no idea. And I think I always liked those sounds. And through college, I think I studied jazz, performance and composition, and it sort of takes you down a slightly different path. And then when you kind of swing back away from it, you were like, oh yeah, this heavily influenced all this music that I had always been loving. And I think that's where it started. But really, in the past 5-6 years, I've now been able to put names and faces to the stuff that I always liked. So I'm definitely late to it, I guess, if by convention.
Yeah. And then so you were working on Never Dance Alone album. Mm-hmm. And you had almost finished the album, and then that's when you reached out to me.
I realized I just needed other people that understood the culture. You know, I wanted to make the music because I could do it by ear, but then you also need people to guide you that are like, okay, this is what this era of music sounded like. These are the sounds, and those are things I couldn't identify for myself. And it just totally makes sense, even just from knowing you, and like aesthetically, that's your whole bag. So that made total sense to me. That was a really seminal moment of change because that instantly led to the creation of more music. You need sometimes the person that, you know, takes you through the door. Like, you can kind of bang on it yourself, but no one may answer because they don't know who you are. But if you have someone who's like, oh, well, I live here, so you can come in. And then that's what you were for me. It's like that passport, that person to unlock the door and say, yeah, I live in this world and you should come hang out because it's great here. And then you get let in to the modern funk boogie world, and then you really start to get absorbed into the fans and the DJs, but you also have someone that can guide you and say like, that's, you know, you should do this. And that was a big change. Yeah,
so I produced a track and I was guiding you, but you also had your own vision of what your music wanted to sound like. And so I think that it was just a really good meeting of the minds, and what you contributed and what I contributed, it resonated with a lot of people, you know? And you got to thank people like Walla P for championing Found You, one of the first people to play it.
Oh yeah.
and still does. So fortunately for people like that who are holding the torch in the scene, um, artists like us can be appreciated by more people.
It's like, yeah, we did a good thing. And
It's crazy, right? Because we're in Toronto. It has a huge music scene and arts, but the actual boogie and funk scene is very, very small. So it's easy to feel like, oh, I haven't accomplished anything. People aren't feeling my music. But there's a whole world out there outside of Toronto that have embraced our stuff, which is kind of cool, wouldn't you say?
oh, I think it's amazing. The Toronto factor is huge just on how you view yourself as successful or not. And I think for the majority of my career, I've viewed myself as incredibly unsuccessful because I can't fill the big venues in Toronto. I don't see my posters when I walk around the city. I don't see myself.
To me, like, that's absurd because you're an amazing live performer. You got the chops. You can play the strings live. You can sing. You put together an incredible band of musicians through the people that you've worked with over the years.
I would love to be able to consistently sell out large venues here or any venue here and support a band and pay people properly. But now maybe I have that in France instead, or Japan or the UK, and that's great. Like I'll as soon as we get off that EU no entry list, like I want to go, and they want to have us. And they want to have the Love Touch family there, like not only me, but just creating this market for Canadian artists. Like that's what you've done. Because now, for all the people that like what I've been doing, they equally love what Amalia has been doing, right, and want her to go over there. And, I think that is awesome. And we could play in Montreal because there is a total cool scene there. And maybe like every scene can't exist in every city, and it just so happens we exist in a city that's really huge with a really small scene for what we do. But then we could go to a small town in the south of France and play to a packed house because the record store there put our 45s at the front of the store. Like I'm kind of into that. Like it's okay. It still hurts your feelings sometimes, but then you're like, oh, this dude in France has ordered literally everything we've ever released twice. Like that's awesome.